Players show up late, they fake the grind, and then wonder why the Miami Dolphins always fold late during the season. So Bradley Chubb came out and said that the team lied last year about wanting to have a winning culture because they essentially stuck their toes in the water, but they didn't dive all the way in, and they gave half-ass effort. And what did that get them in return? They got half-ass results, not making it to the playoffs. They refused to buy into the new culture that Mike McDaniel was trying to implement, and they essentially quit on them. And Mike McDaniel, as likable as a guy as what he is, he's on the hot seat, not because he's a bad coach per se, because he has had Tua playing some really good football. His offenses have been really good. But what he lacks is the ability to get the respect of his locker room. At the end of the season last year, he came out and said that players, despite how much they find them, still continue to show up to meetings and practice late. Why was that? Because they didn't respect Mike McDaniel. Nobody would ever think of showing up to Mike Tomlin or John Harbaugh's meetings late unless you simply didn't care. And that's why Mike Tomlin got rid of George Pickens. He wasn't bought in. He isn't a championship-winning player. And Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill, which are the two players that Mike McDaniel was indirectly referring to, with your two-star players who get paid more than anybody else on your roster come into the facilities late, it sets a bad culture and a bad precedent for the rest of your team, because it makes everybody else feel that they can walk over you too because you're too soft. They can't take nothing that you say seriously. That's why they didn't take their fine seriously. Because look at the coach. When you look like Leonard from the Big Bang Theory, how can anybody in that locker room take you seriously? And these statements that Nick Chubb put out, Mike McDaniel responded to him, and he essentially brushed them off. He said, we're not worried about last season. We're worried about this upcoming season, when he should be worried about these statements. Because it pretty much shows that the Dolphins aren't going to be good this year because this team doesn't know what it takes to win, and that Mike McDaniel is going to be one of the first coaches to get fired come Black Monday. And this just reminds me of what Vic Fangio said when he left the Miami Dolphins. He essentially was coaching a bunch of kids who didn't respond well to tough coaching, and they wanted to be coddled. And when he left, the Eagles end up winning the Super Bowl, and the Dolphins end up coming up short of making it to the playoffs, and the defense somewhat dropped off as well. And a lot of players were celebrating when Vic Fangio left because they didn't like his style of coaching. Well, the reason why they didn't like his style of coaching is because look who the head coach is. Mike McDaniel doesn't coach the Dolphins tough. That's why they can't win games in the cold weather months. They come out hot during September and October, but once you get into the real football season that gets played after Thanksgiving, they got to go on the road to Lambeau Field, and they're freezing to death. They're unable to win those games because they don't have the toughness in order to do so. And I'm not just referring to their offensive line and defensive line not being good, but I'm just talking about from a basic mentality standpoint, they're soft. Because if you can't take to hard coaching, how are you going to respond in freezing cold conditions when you're a team that normally is playing in 70, 80 degree weather in most games, and the environment that really tests your mental capability, your mental toughness? Mike McDaniel can't win the big games because his team doesn't respond to big game atmospheres. They don't respond well to being in big moments because they haven't been coached up and conditioned well enough to be able to thrive in those big moments, to win those big games, to beat teams like the 49ers or the Buffalo Bills. The biggest win they had was when they came back on the Baltimore Ravens a few seasons ago. That's the only good team I can remember the Miami Dolphins being able to beat. Outside of that, I don't really have too many memories that I can go back to when I can recall the Dolphins actually looking like a team that was as good as what they always look on paper. And even going into this season, although I'm down on Miami, the roster still isn't really that bad. You did have a bunch of injuries. Getting Bradley Chubb back is definitely going to help out that defense. But the offensive line still isn't that good. And you still are a track team. And that's why Mike McDaniel, with him being able to get the respect of his locker room and the players to buy in to having a winning culture, is ultimately going to lead to his demise at the end of this season. And he will be one of the first things smoking on out of there when they end up underachieving and missing the postseason once again.